Ding. Okay, welcome everyone to this afternoon's meeting of the Scrutiny Inquiry Panel into Community Assets. If I can first take apologies for absence, please.
Hello, yes, apologies for absence from Councillor Chris Holly, Alan Jeffrey, Cheryl Philpott.
And are there any disclosures of personal or prejudicial interest? I take that as no. As you can see on the agenda, item 3 is a prohibition of whip votes and declaration of party whips, which is there for information. And then for public questions, we haven't received any in advance of the meeting. So on to item 5 then, and that's if I can hand over for a strategic overview to Councillor David Hopkins, the Cabinet Member for Corporate Services and Performance. And I think he's been joined by Mark online, Mark Wade, Director of Place, and Jeff Bacon's in the room with us as well, Head of Property Services. So Mike Locke is also here in the room, and Michelle Roberts is here to service the committee as well. Okay, so if I can hand over to you, Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. What I would say, this community asset transfer has been with us for some time. It serves some really good, really good opportunities, particularly to enable communities to access funds where we probably can't. Although it probably sits under me, I work very closely with Robert Francis Davis and our regeneration, and certainly in our leisure department, very closely with our colleagues in Jeff Bacon's department as well to oversee this. So this is something that we work across the authority on. I know legal are heavily involved, particularly with leases. So it works well. It worked well in several areas. There are lessons to be learned, I'm sure, and I think the scrutiny panel is welcomed. I think it's only right and proper that we can learn from where we are and what we got going forward. And it is, for me, an ever-changing thing, because where grant funding is not available, or where it is available, that we can't fund. So I've got no other strategic overview than it had worked really, really well, and I think we could use members' council, community council, particularly, where they've accessed huge amount of money where this council couldn't do it, and there are lots and lots of examples. And I would have thought that there would be opportunities, perhaps this committee could look at some of them sort of interventions and where they've been and what the benefits are. So I'm just want to give a commitment. We work very closely with you as chair and with the committee to be as honest and open as we possibly can, and come back and look for some solutions, probably to improve where we are. So very good, and just welcome, happy to be part of the panel.
Thank you. Jeff, do you wish to take up the rest of the report?
I'll run through the report. I'm gonna dare I say, can anyone hear me? Everyone hear me? Can you? Brilliant. There we are. Good job. Report in front of you, and there's quite a few. There's some weighty appendices there, but I'll briefly go through the report, and I'm happy to have and be involved in a wider discussion, Chair. The question that was asked of us, the purpose of scrutiny, was how can the council ensure that its community assets are working to provide the best outcomes for the people of Swansea? So that's a very general question, but to be fair, the meat and drink of what I was asked to report on is all to do with community asset transfers, which is just one mechanism clearly for community assets to provide services and the best outcomes of the people of Swansea. We do have an established policy, a community asset transfer policy that's contained in the report in Appendix A, that was brought in to make sure we have a consistent and, as far as it can be, equitable and sustainable approach to community asset transfers. There are a number of very key principles in that policy. It's about continuation of service, because there will be occasions, or were occasions, when we were asked, oh, can we take on an asset, when the reality is the purpose of that asset wasn't about the delivery of service. It could be for a coffee shop or a creche or a nursery or whatever. So it's clear that it was set out in terms of continuation of service. Plus, there had to be a mutual benefit for us as a property owner, and for the organisation in whatever shape or form they were coming forward to enable them to provide a service. So they were the key principles, but there's a number of key principles in the policy which I'm sure Scrutiny as a group will come and have a look at, and if they feel there's opportunities to change, we can consider and possibly take that forward to constitutional work groups and the rest. Some of the key principles I will come on to, in terms of the process of community asset transfers, are critical in that any approach has to have the support of the appropriate cabinet member, and has to have the support and the advocacy of the appropriate head of service or director. Because if there is support, that has to go forward to cabinet for consideration and approval, and then that's taken forward into the actual process of getting legal documentation, etc., in train and get that in place. That is important because quite often they will fall at that hurdle. In fact, sometimes they fall at a hurdle before that when we've asked groups can they please just put forward in a very simple format what they're looking to try and do with regards to community asset transfer, and probably 90% fall at that point. So the reality is that they can't actually look to present something in such a way that they just to write something down, for example, and it's not a particularly complex form for them to complete. If they can't do that, there's pretty little chance they're going to take an asset on and deliver a service. So that was quite a helpful way of perhaps weeding out some of the less sustainable and more realistic opportunities. Something we have set out in this report is that it isn't just community asset transfers that enables communities to run their services. And I made a very specific point about referring to the yellow licenses or the annual licenses in place of the community centres, because they are, in my mind, the model that works, because it isn't the case of handing a lease of an asset onto a group. There is continued support and excellent support, albeit with dwindling resource, from Tracy Minolti's team in terms of enabling those groups to have autonomy in terms of how they manage the facilities there, but also to have continued support, which is probably can be seen as very onerous. That's critically important. Community asset transfer doesn't do that. It basically says you want to take it on, you're going to deliver that service. Here you go. This is the lease documentation. You take it on and you deliver the service on this basis. No rents forthcoming, but effectively you will take that asset on. There are a large number of potential stakeholders in terms of the various community groups. The points made in the report, the communities don't always speak as one voice. So it doesn't matter what you present, no matter how laudable it may be, there will quite often be opposition. So it's very, very important for us to make sure that anyone who comes forward with a proposition is heavily engaged with the community to make sure there isn't anything which may be possibly contrary to what's been proposed for the wider community. But it's very unlikely you'll get every single member of the community being happy with any proposal to come forward. So that's a significant challenge for us. Welsh Government are also a significant stakeholder. We've attached in the report the community asset guidance from Welsh Government, and that is extensive and wordy and complex. They recognise across Wales that it's not as straightforward as it may appear. And they held a cross-party public inquiry into the corporate asset transfer process. I was involved in that in terms of my role, not just in Swansea, but in terms of my national role as part of the Association of Chief Estate Surveyors. And I was speaking on behalf of every authority in that regard from a property perspective. And we all had similar problems. It's not straightforward. It's not necessarily always one size fits all. Quite often the support needed for the community groups is something that local authorities can't always give, because it isn't just support at the outset. It's continuous support, and that can be challenging at different levels. We do have some clear principles in terms of finance, the fact that there needs to be a financial benefit for the authority because we are handing over an asset effectively for nil value. And so it has to be a case of a group will take on an asset, but it's delivering a service that the council can no longer take forward. So there needs to be a cashable saving. The policy is quite clear on that. We set out current performance of trends. If you put the community centres, the 40 or so community centres and OAP pavilions to one side, we've effectively transferred 12 bowling greens, 15 bowl pavilions, 16 allotment sites, along as well as a number of football pitches, open spaces, and community buildings. So there's been a large number, scores of particular assets that are included in the successful so far community asset transfers. I've also set up what I think the future challenges are, and it's support for the groups. Ensuring they're properly organised and they have constitutions in place, for example, to make sure they know who does what, because you can't just rely on, sometimes it's very enthusiastic individuals. That person may move, die, get divorced, get given up the ghost, and you can't have it relying on one person. It needs to be something that is sustainable with a proper constitution to make sure we know they know and we know who's responsible for what. We try and have a standard approach. The policy itself says, if you want to take something on, this is the lease, off you go. Quite often there are long delays because we'll have a back and forth about the lease that's presented, because at that point, the groups understand what they are responsible for. And that's when you do get sort of, well, we'll take it on, but we won't do that and we won't do that. The reality is it won't work for the authority if that's the case. It needs to be, you take it on, we can perhaps temper the expectations to a degree, But the reality is we can't really have a halfway house, aside from the annual licenses we have for community centres. But to enable more of those to be created, there would need to be more resource to enable that to happen. Resource is undoubtedly going to be an issue. And I think it is that offers a resource, less on the harder, if you like, property side, the legal side, more to do with the softer side in terms of how you enable that group to flourish and feel as if and they get the sense they're not basically left on their own. And I think that's a challenge that we all have. Every authority in Wales has a very similar concern. There are other stakeholders I'm happy to ask to get involved, either from other authorities or from the likes of One Voice Wales, who speak more widely in terms of support to those particular community groups. But hopefully that sets the scene. And not an awful lot I can say at this point in terms of how you want to take the scrutiny inquiry forward. But as we've discussed, Chair, I'm concerned about how much input you want from officers, because it's a challenge for us all at the moment.
Thank you, Jeff. That's really helpful. Just to respond to your comment there, I think we'd want to try and keep as focused as possible and to try and ensure that we're not as resource demanding as all that. One of the points that we haven't really looked in the scope going forward at, which is really useful that you raised there, is about the support in terms of duty of care going forward for facilities. And that's something that's quite dominant now in the relationship between community centres, their yellow licence and the council. And it's very helpful. It's a supported environment. So making sure people are aware of their legal responsibilities, what duties they need to undertake. And I think certainly when you've got a yellow licence, which is a 1-year affair, and some of the leases that we're looking at are 25 years potentially, is what could we possibly recommend from this scrutiny group in terms of support, or what avenues could there be either internally or externally to support groups like that? I know that one of the members who couldn't make it today, who gave her apologies, is Cheryl Philpott. Councillor Philpott also asked, as a part of the inquiry, to look at the yellow licence, and if we could have a copy of that sort of distributed. And I think if it's probably from Tracy, but not his team there, that they'd be able to provide it for us. But I just want to open up at this stage now to the rest of the panel and to members here. Jeff, do you want to come back quickly?
Yeah, very quick point. Sorry, it's not in the report, and that's remiss of me. Quite often, the length of lease term that is asked for from these particular groups relates to grant funding, and so it's enabling these groups to unlock funding that perhaps the local authority couldn't or wouldn't be able to do. So sometimes the length of them can increase depending upon how much money is actually being sought. So that can often be a determining factor. But apart from that, the lease terms should be generic.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I think that's an important area, especially with many of these transfers about how to improve the facility, and I suppose it's the criteria of any grants that's been received and how long they've got control or ownership of, or sort of fundamental control of that land is important. Okay, if I can open it out to the wider panel, has anybody got anything that they want to raise as a part of this inquiry? We've set out in the documents in the agenda papers a kind of progress that we hope to make over the next few meetings. Is there anything of particular interest that people want to raise now, or want to raise with Jeff from the report, or with Councillor Hopkins? I can't see any hands coming up there. I think as a part of the inquiry, what would be really useful is we obviously call for evidence, and I can see a few faces on screen here where there have been community asset transfers in their area, and it would be useful if you could think about the experience you've had in your own areas and maybe bring some of those bits of information there. I know, for example, I can see Councillor Will Thomas there, who has been involved in Mumbles Community Council and the asset transfer of Underhill Park as well, and the situations there. It'd be interesting to see different kinds of experiences that people have had and what we can take in terms of positives from them, or areas of improvement from examples. What I'm trying to do with this scrutiny at the moment is not to look at specifics, look more at general principles and what we can do to improve. There may be specific examples that will give us information, but I think the key thing for us really is to focus on what we can do to improve and what we can have to strengthen the situation going forward. Okay, any other comments that people would like to make before we look on to the next section? Okay, I can see Councillor Thomas there.
Yeah, Chair, thanks. Excuse me. Yeah, I think it's really good that we can meet like this and bring the inquiry forward. As you know, Mumbles Community Council have put in, I think some of the officers might get a bit fed up with the amount of asset transfers that have been requested by the Community Council, which I'm a part of. You know, there's several which have gone in over the years, a couple of which have been successful. Langland tennis courts. Obviously, we asked for the whole site at Langland, but you know, it was just sort of half the site which we achieved. We've done up 2 of those tennis courts, which now look fantastic. Now there's a popular basketball, so it's proof that the council can, you know, do successful asset transfers, and that community councils and other groups can run those successfully. The Underhill one, just touching on that, was quite complex. I mean, Jamie will know, it was, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the lease. There's a lot of sometimes the council doesn't always own the freehold for the sites, and there's other interested parties, and it can take up a lot of officer time. So I think when we're looking at this, we need to you know, think long and hard about when you know, as Jeff was saying, when people make those applications, they've got to be understanding as to how much resources of the councils that's going to take up, you know, and therefore how long sometimes these things are going to take. But all in all, as Councillor Hopkins said at the start, it's great because we can access, or we being community councils and other groups, can access different funding for things, and also give some assets much more attention than the council's got resources for. So yeah, really good inquiry. Looking forward to it, and I've got a lot to add, but a lot of detail to come, I'm sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Thomas. Part of it, as I mentioned just before, is a call for evidence. So it may be that there are community groups or people who've experienced asset transfer in your wards, or a wider afield from your wards, that you feel might be positive to engage in this process and give us key information, or to give us a steer on some of the things that might improve or what they benefit from. I mean, that would be a key thing for us to do. We're going to advertise the call for evidence in the normal ways, so we'll come onto the council website. But if there's any particular areas or places you feel that the call for evidence should go to, you know, it's a good time to sort of either contact Michelle or myself, or to mention it today, and we'll try to make sure that it gets out to those key groups that can help us shape the future and how we can pull things forward. Okay, any other comments from people before we move on to the next section? Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, just an observation. I think it would be good to take evidence probably from some well-established groups and some new groups that's actually coming on board, and listening to where their journeys are going, and seeing what we are enabling them to do by this community asset transfer. So I think it's getting a broad spectrum, particularly because there's not a level playing field throughout the city. Some areas are very good at contrast when taking over community assets, others are not, and there's very little interest to do so, as in fairness to Jeff mentioned in his report. So it's certainly not a level playing field in any shape or form. And I think getting that experience from other areas and learning from the established and not, you know, the new would work for me. I think it would be very, very useful to see the comparisons and where people are on their journey.
I think that'd be very useful, especially aligned with what Jeff had said earlier about the support available for people during the process. Some people may feel more ready to do that in certain communities, and other communities and other people may need more support to try and achieve the same things that they'd like to try to do. Okay, thank you. If I just move on then to section 6 of the agenda, which is to look at the draft inquiry terms of reference and the project plan. You've seen them laid out at the back of the agenda on 48 to 56. The first thing I would touch on there that you can see is we've got the terms of reference, which start on page 49. We've looked at basically scoping out the work through the terms of reference, and you'll see following that then there is a potential draft agenda for each of the following meetings. So has anybody got any comments or would like to see anything in terms of additions or amendments to what's suggested in the terms of reference? Councillor Sue Jones.
I think, like Councillor Hopkins said, some examples would be something that we can actually look at to get our heads around exactly what community assets are and transfer is.
I think that's a really valid point, Sue, and we are looking at engaging stakeholders and people who've actually been involved in the process. And then we can also have a look at the clarification of what a community asset could be. I know that Jeff earlier outlined what wouldn't be a community asset transfer, in the sense that if it went to a strictly commercial concern rather than one which would be for a community benefit. But yeah, certainly I think we need to engage stakeholders to make sure that that we understand what the best way to engage in this process going forward would be, and also to have a look at the actual assets that might be tangible assets that could go into asset transfer. Councillor Jardine.
Thanks, Chair. You answered a bit the last part of your statement. Others that would be going into transfer, but my question would be, could we know about maybe the ones that haven't worked for us or for the person, or ones that we're having? Are there any, I should say, that we're having issues with for whatever reason, that we've done the transfer, but now there's a problem that we are struggling to resolve, maybe, or maybe the transferee are having a problem with us? So, yeah.
Yeah, I do think, Councillor Jardine, that's really important, because what we're going to look at is situations where things may have broken down or not gone in the way that people first intended, or there may be reasons that we can look at in terms of policy which haven't sort of necessarily enabled the person to achieve what they wanted to do. Or it could be that the council hasn't got what they expected from the transfer as well. So I think it is important to have a look at where things have gone well, where things have happened differently, or maybe where things haven't worked so well. And just because from each of those examples, you're going to learn something.
Sorry, Chair, could I just ask, do we have any recourse? So it's not working. Do we have any recourse to put an end to it, or to, do we have any recourse?
Yes, I mean, that's a really important thing. So it can be from the very beginning what our due diligence is, checking the potential partner, and maybe then looking at the leases and the agreements that are put in place. Are there any break clauses? Are there any referral clauses? Are there anything that we can enact to say, well, that person has taken, or group has taken on this asset, it's not going as we expected it to be, or it's not engaging the community in the way that we'd hoped. It's looking at those opportunities as well. I think you're right for that. I think Councillor Thomas was next.
Can I just add to what Yvonne said, just because have there been any transfer that's been transferred back to council as well?
I think that's a really important point as well, Sue, that we look at that. Is there something where, and what's the process of it referring back as well, if it has? Councillor Thomas.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, one of the things that I often think about is what assets the council has that no one's necessarily coming forward for, but they would benefit from giving away. Or I'll give you an example. The toilets in Oxwich, I'm not sure if they've actually, not Oxwich, sorry, in Rossilli. I'm not sure if that has, it has actually been given to the National Trust now, has it? Does anyone know that? I don't think so.
I think Jeff can come in and help us with that one.
Yeah, Councillor, no, they haven't, because of the legal restrictions that exist. There is an intention to do so after a fixed period. I think it's 5 years, because we've successfully applied for grants to do the changing places in Rossilli, and I think it would be a logical conclusion, quite frankly, bearing in mind the fact that it's where it is, and the fact that's very much National Trust sites, for the council to continue to run public toilets in the middle of a National Trust site doesn't make an awful lot of sense, does it? And I think sometimes it's uncertain as to who has responsibility for what. Can I respond to some of the points you made earlier on, Chair? I think I'm not responding specifically on these because I quite frankly can't, but would the intention be that as a group, as a panel, you come up with various questions and then we try and respond as best we possibly can? Is that okay?
Yeah, I think that in terms of scoping the way forward, you've probably seen on page 52 that we've put general topic matters for the next few meetings. Okay. And what I would hope to do is with the panel is agree a series of sort of questions to help
Right.
inform what the next sort of report might be. And if we would agree then maybe within a week of this meeting, so we can send them over to the relevant staff and cabinet members to have a look at. And we try to make sure that they're as policy focused as possible.
So just to follow up on that, it's going to be a lot easier for me because we talked about resources. It's going to be me dealing with this. So to be able to respond to queries that you've got, as opposed to me saying, well, this one's worked, this one hasn't worked. Quite often understanding what's worked on the ground may be a different response from the one I might give, for example. So if that's okay, if you deal with that on a basis, I can deal with it much easier then.
I think that sounds sensible.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Thomas, your hand's still up. Have you got another point to raise?
Yeah, I was just finishing off that point really. It's just that sometimes there's assets that the council, I'm sure, would very much like to offload, but maybe someone's not come forward for them, or maybe it for whatever reason. I was using that toilet block as an example, because obviously to clean those toilets is a lot of resources for the council. They've got to send cleaners all the way out there. And it makes sense that the National Trust or someone would take those off the council because they run that whole site. Is there any other, assets like that that people aren't necessarily coming forward for, but other people could be approached to take them over? Are we being proactive as well as reactive to applications for asset transfers? That's really my point. Am I making sense on that one?
Yeah, you're certainly making sense on that one about proactive. Is there a list of things that we might offer out and see if people are interested in taking transfer? That is an area which I know that other authorities have looked at previously, and I think we probably have as well. And I think it's also maybe looking at some examples from other authorities around Wales and maybe even further afield of what kinds of facilities they have transferred, because it might be that we think of certain facilities here, and we get stuck in thinking, okay, well, we could do tennis courts, we could do maybe open spaces, we could do various community facilities. There may be other lists of things that have been transferred in other locations, which may also be of benefit for us to consider and see that they could go in future policies. Any other points? Anything that people would like to raise? Are people happy with the terms of reference as they stand at the moment? Okay, I take that as yes. So if we just have a quick look at the project plan going forward. So the next session, we're going to do a bit of evidence gathering in between. And obviously, as I suggested earlier, we'll send out a list of questions for Jeff, hopefully, to help steer us with, and cabinet member. In terms of the next session, there are 4 kind of key areas we're looking at there: due diligence, risks which come from asset transfer, barriers to asset transfer, and guidance and support that's provided during asset transfer. And one of the templates that I'm keen to try and use, and I think is very useful for us as a group to look at, is the legislative guidance which comes from the Welsh Government, and it's quite fulsome. As Jeff said, it's technical in some areas, but there's some very sort of straightforward and easier areas to look at there. It's things like community involvement, inclusion, making sure that there are robust procedures like a constitution, financial arrangements in place for the organisations. And I think that's a good starting point. So if you have any thoughts about that for the next meeting, and when Michelle sends around a list of questions, have a think about if there's any specific things you want to know there or to add into it. And the next session after that, which is due for the 25th of March, is specifically looking at cultural services, as they are the main group that asset transfers happen in at the moment and previously. And that can pick up some of the things which I think people like Councillor Philpott had mentioned about yellow licenses as well. And by session 3, we're looking to try and develop any updates or amendments or improvements potentially to the policy. And it's a key time then, by that stage, we would have identified some stakeholders who may be able to come along and share some experiences with us. What I think we'll do is make sure that that's done in a really positive and productive way, so that we have a range of people, and that they know the purpose is to give us some feedback rather than necessarily dwell too much on individual cases. I think that would be a key thing. And then hopefully by meeting 5, we'll start to have some strong findings that we can put together. Is there anything else that people would like to see in that scrutiny plan for the next few meetings? Okay, that seems that everyone's happy with that and wants to accept it. I think it's going to, personally, it's going to be a really interesting area, and it's an area where we can make a big difference. We can learn from good examples of practice where it hasn't gone so well, and also what people have done elsewhere. And I think it's a real chance to improve the facilities for people in Swansea, whilst also helping people bring in additional funding or look at ways in which we can provide cashable savings for the council, whilst we're not sort of downgrading the facilities that are available to the general public. Okay, is there anything else before I move off that and close the meeting that anybody would like to raise? Okay, so you've probably seen from the agenda and from what we've just been looking at that the next meeting is scheduled for Monday the 11th at 5 o'clock in the afternoon. And again, that will be a hybrid meeting, which would be online and in person here, probably in the Gloucester room, Michelle. Okay, well, thank you very much for everyone attending. Thank you.
Thanks, Al.